Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. And in this series of episodes, we're continuing our look at Russian-Polish relations. And I think we've reached a particularly exciting point in the story, which is the beginning of the 17th century, a key moment both for the beginning. We see the beginning of the rise of the Romanovs, which were with us until the 1917 revolution. And we see Poland perhaps at its most powerful, about to approach the tipping point.
As you mentioned, it was the start of the Romanov dynasty. It also marked the end of the Rurikid dynasty. The Rurikids, of course, made their presence felt in Russia at the end of the 9th century, the start of the 10th century, and ruled up to, technically, up to the death of Ivan the Terrible in 1584. He was at least the last real ruler with power. His son, Dmitry I, died in 1591 at the age of 8. It was really what started the troubles, you could say, as it started a crisis of legitimacy. There was no heir, and there was also a controversy how the young king had died. According to one school of thought, he had been killed on the orders of the next Tsar, Boris Godunov. According to another story, it was a tragic accident where he had an epileptic seizure whilst playing with a knife and accidentally either stabbed himself in the throat or just fell forward on the knife that he had held in his hand. According to a third school, Boris Godunov had actually sent assassins to kill the young king, but they failed and instead killed another boy while the young Dmitry managed to run away. When the first false Dmitry showed up, he appeared in Poland in 1603 and started convincing some of the Polish magnates that he was the rightful heir, and if they helped him to regain power, he would in turn give them some benefits and allow them to expand into Russia. He convinced some of the Polish nobility. They started funding him, and with those funds and also with some of their private armies that these Polish magnates sent, in 1604 he turned back to Russia with around 2,500 men. A small force, but he was quickly joined by some Don Cossacks that also had their own issues with Tsar Godunov. And as they started advancing into Russia, more and more people joined up. Boris Godunov had not really been a bad Tsar, but he had never managed to solve the issue with legitimacy. The Russian people, they had been used to centuries of rule from the Rurikid dynasty, and they were simply not accustomed to this new situation. He also failed to do some, he didn't manage to please the nobility. He didn't manage to either clamp down on them strongly enough for them to become afraid of him and not question his rule, or to bribe them with various gifts. He tried to choose a middle way, and in the end it turned out that it wasn't good enough. So many of them started switching their allegiance to this false Dmitry, and he quickly managed to win a couple of battles. In the end, though, he did lose a major battle, but he was very lucky because Boris Godunov died of natural causes soon thereafter, and by that time everybody turned to false Dmitry as their new Tsar. He entered into Moscow with a couple of hundred Poles that had supported him, and quickly he married Marina Mniszek, a daughter of a Polish nobleman that he had met her during his time in Poland before his invasion of Russia. She, however, did not agree to convert to Orthodoxy, so she remained Catholic despite being crowned as the Tsarina of Russia. This was an enormous affront to the Russian people and the Russian nobility in particular. So it didn't strengthen false Dmitry's position. Only a couple of weeks after this marriage, the men of Prince Vasily Ussuriski, one of the noblemen that had been against this idea to align with the Poles, they stormed the Kremlin, and false Dmitry had tried to escape through a window, fell, broke his leg, and was shot and killed on sight. according to the story, he was cremated and his ashes were loaded into a cannon and fired in the direction of Poland, back where he had came from. However, Vasily Shuisky instead was crowned as the new Tsar, but a year later in 1607, a second false Dmitry appeared, and incredibly, Marina Mniszek recognized him, that this was actually her husband.
Oh, right.
So even some of the Polish historians and Polish noblemen of that time, they couldn't help themselves from commenting on the comedy that they considered this entire event being, but still this was the official story. The second false Dmitry was the first false Dmitry, who was in turn the real Dmitry, so he was still, according to the Poles, the legitimate ruler of Russia. So he again also launched an invasion of Russia, quickly gained a lot of allies, and started advancing on Moscow. And in the end, he managed to win a couple of important victories, but it was first really in 1609 when Vasily Shuisky signed an alliance with the Swedes that were really the dominant force of that time in the northern Baltics. It was also the main enemy of the Polish king, since Sigismund Vasa came from the Swedish Vasa dynasty, and he had never relinquished the claim to the Swedish throne. So his ambitions were initially not that much focused on Russia, but rather by defeating Sweden, by defeating Sweden's ally in the east, which was Russia. And the Poles again set out on a new campaign towards Moscow. After having taken Moscow first, the previous Tsar, Vasily Shuisky IV, had been taken captive. He had been sent to Poland, where he had to fall on his knees in front of the Polish king, and he died in custody in Poland. Instead, the Russians, after chasing the Poles away from the Kremlin, they decided to elect the son of Fyodor Romanov. The son, Mikhail Romanov, was only 15. Fyodor Romanov, who had been one of the anti-Polish boyars from the start, was instead chosen as the new patriarch of the Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox Church, and took the name Filaret, one of the most important patriarchs in Russian history. His son Mikhail Romanov, being the Tsar, now inherited this war with Poland, and it continued in 1617. The Poles received a lot of help from their Ukrainian allies, or Ukrainian is probably an anachronical term for those times. They were Cossacks from the Zaporizhian host, who they had sworn allegiance to the Polish king centuries earlier. And Poland had created a so-called Cossack registry, where a number of prominent Cossacks were allowed to wage war on behalf of the Polish king and would be paid from the Polish state treasury. So they were led by their Cossack leader, Petro Sahaidaczny. He assembled a unit of around 20,000 men, and he and the Poles met up together in front of the gates of Moscow in 1617, threatening the city. But the Poles felt that they didn't really have enough strength to take the city again. At the same time, the Russians were tired of the war, and they saw that the Poles and these Cossacks, they were very strong out in the open field. So in the end, they negotiated a truce that wasn't satisfactory to any of the two parts, but at least it ended the war. The Poles, they gained some territorial acquisitions: Chernihiv, Siewiersk, Smolensk, and this created, with the Truce of Dulino in 1618, it created the largest geographical area that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth ever encompassed in its history. More than 1 million square kilometers, the largest and most populous state of Europe at that time.
We hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Poland Daily History.